What If by William W. Stuart, originally published in Fantastic Stories of Imagination, February 1962. Narrated by Tom Trisser. Some people have a natural talent for music, for colour, form, shape, design. There are born talkers, dancers, legal minds, scientists, businessmen, and ribbon clerks. Almost everyone has some ability. What he achieves with it is a matter of degree and of decision. Even George Dibbit must have had something. He was a very intelligent, sensitive boy. But if George was fitted for anything in this world, it was only something approximating a life sentence in some secure, strict, but reasonably comfortable prison, or, perhaps, life as a free citizen of an Iron Curtain democracy. He did have a talent, which was an outstanding ability to look ahead, examine all sides of any given situation, and visualize a variety of possible courses of action and their probable results. His trouble was inability to face those results. No course was perfect. His mind would cast about in agonies of indecision, seeking a better way. He could rarely decide on anything. The responsibility for what might happen was too great. If he could only know. An iron-willed mother, a succession of strict schools, and a thoroughly routine, regulation-ridden clerical job with the Department of Internal Revenue got him through his first 30 years. From the time in the morning when Mother said, "Time to get up, Georgie boy," till she told him, "Better get a beauty rest, Georgie." Every move was governed by instruction, advice, order, or regulation. But when Georgie was 30, Mother died. He needed, desperately, some strong-minded spinster standing by, ready to grab hold and take over. But Mother, selfishly perhaps, had failed to provide. Given time, one surely would have turned up. But for George Dibbit, the interval of non-direction between Mother and Mrs. was too great to span, and he went down in it. The immediate shock of Mother's passing he withstood fairly well. The firmly sympathetic, black-velvet gentle, strong hand of Mr. Samuel Unger, funeral director and family friend, directed everything. Mr. Unger, "Just call me Uncle Sammy, George, old boy," saw George very nicely through the first trying days and weeks and the most of his modest inheritance. But then, all too soon, it was time to get back to normal living, back to work, and, of course, there were decisions, and decisions that kindly old Uncle Sammy couldn't handle for him. What to wear? Well, mourning, naturally. That took care of that. But then, what should he eat for breakfast? Mother had kept switching from oatmeal to grits to soft-boiled eggs, and now how could he be sure what was right on any given morning? And how should he get down to work? Car or bus? Both the bus company and Mr. Heinkel at the service station had persuasive arguments. Mr. Heinkel's aggressive personality won out initially, but George wasn't happy about it. The traffic, decisions, and any one could be fatal for him or for someone else. A left turn at Frank Street, and a truck might stop short, a pedestrian jump, a lady driver swerve. Who could say where the chain would end? Every day George Dibbit showed up at work more nervously distraught than the one before. His hands trembled. He gnawed lips and fingernails. He suffered from hives. He was suspected of secret vices. On each decision he tried to visualize all the possible results so that he could make the wise, the just selection of a course to take. What if I do leave the car and take the bus? What about that boy, Freddie, at the parking lot and his tip? What if— He sweated, and he agonized over the answer to that what if. If he could only be sure. But then, one evening, he had to make a snap decision between ham and cheese. What if? He wondered. And then, all at once, he knew the answer. He broke. It was April. Naturally, the department was frantically busy. The division head, Mr. Skinner, said on Friday, "All right, boys and girls, it's overtime for everyone tonight." It was all right with George. He loved to do what he was told. But then, at 6 o'clock, Mr. Skinner had said, "I'm going to send out for coffee and sandwiches. On me, kiddies, order anything you want, just so it's ham or cheese." His eye fell on George, busily checking returns at his desk. "What'll it be, Georgie? Ham or cheese?" There it was, squarely up to George, and without even anyone else to order first and set a precedent. One or the other, he had to decide. Ham or cheese? What if? George asked himself frantically, searching his mind. And then he found the answer. He heard himself, in his mind, ordering ham. Then little Mrs. Dennison, always so helpful, would go across the street to Arthur's. She would give the order. Arthur himself would be there, fat, smiling. He would get the ham, put it in the slicer. Zip, 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 the slices. One more for George. And then a fat cockroach would scuttle across the floor. "Ooh!" Mrs. Dennison would scream. Arthur's fat head would swing around. Zip! George's slice of ham, and with it the tips of 4 fingers of Arthur's right hand. Arthur never would use a guard on that slicer. So poor fat Arthur would stare in shocked, unbelieving horror at his blood-spouting hand. His fat heart would flutter, quiver, and stop. Arthur would be dead, because he, George Dibbit, had decided to say ham. He couldn't make a decision that would result in the death of poor, inoffensive, not very offensive anyway, Arthur. But suppose he were to order cheese instead? Then, Mrs. Dennison knew he liked Swiss cheese. Arthur was out of Swiss. Mrs. Dennison, always so eager to please, would decide to run across the street while Arthur was fixing the rest of the order and get George a Swiss cheese at Ciro's. She would dash out of Arthur's, a quick, careless look, and she would dart out into the quiet evening street. A hurtling cab around the corner, screaming brakes. Poor, crushed, crumpled little Mrs. Dennison. "George," snapped Mr. Skinner's voice of doom. "Damn it! Snap out of it, will you? What'll it be, ham or cheese?" George Dibbit gave a weak little moan, tensed, stiffened, and sat rigid in his chair, eyes staring, empty, blank. It was a most unusual case. What on earth could have sent the poor boy off like that? Very sad thing. The ambulance was prompt, and the attendants took him away, of course, but the work of the department never did get back on schedule that April. A little over 2 years later, Dr. E. Burton Halliwell, director, guided a committee of the legislature through the state mental hospital. There was There always was. The question of the biennial appropriation. Dr. Hallowell, not in his role as dapper darling of the Ladies' Club lecture circuit for this occasion, but wearing his hairless old tweed, threadbare appropriations suit, as he called it, was making an excellent impression. He always did. This was his talent, and he gave it full play as he showed the legislators about selected sectors of his shop. Maximum security wards. Frankly, gentlemen, understaffed as we so regrettably are, I say a prayer nightly for the safety of your loved ones. Hydrotherapy, electrotherapy, drug therapy, group therapy, work therapy. So pitifully little we can do, my friends, with the poor tools at our command. Penny wisdom in cruel fact, gentlemen. If it were only realized, the saving to the state for each patient we are able to discharge. The tour was to end, stressing the note of future savings for investment now, with a conscience-twisting turn through a ward devoted to basic custody and care of the apparently hopelessly lost ones. In the so-called section recreation room, upstate Representative Crabtree, a thin, sour man with a nagging yelp for a voice, a coyote bucking for the title of Watchdog of the Appropriations Committee, sidled up to a quiet, seated figure. "Well, young man," he said, "you look healthy enough to me to do a day's work. How long do you intend to loaf around here at taxpayers— The Honourable Mr. Crabtree had moved in beside the chair and bent down for a close, accusing look at this taxpayer's burden. The stiff, frozen, wax-like face and wide-open, blank, dead eyes stopped him cold, but not, of course, for long. "Hey, this one is dead! Halliwell, this one is— Say, what are you trying to pull, Halliwell? This here is a dummy. Must be made out of wax or something." Dr. Hallowell moved up with the easy assurance of a pitchman with a genuine mermaid. "Ah, this one, poor fellow. A classic case, truly. In all my years of professional experience, the catatonic state to be so impenetrably complete rarely have I seen." Dr. Hallowell had found just a touch of foreign flavour in his speech to be quite effective. "Effectively as you see him now, this one has been 2 years with us. Electric shock, drug shock, nothing the impression has made." "It's a dummy! It ain't alive!" yelped Representative Crabtree on a hot scent. The other 6 members of the committee straggled up for a look. Dr. Hallowell smiled with great skill, expressing both superior professional knowledge and war sympathy. "Not alive. True, something inside has died. And yet, all of the motor functions of the organism in perfect order are. Here, sir, feel here, just here, that pulse. Strong and steady, is it not?" Representative Crabtree took the wrist suspiciously, dropped it almost at once and stepped back. The seated figure's arm fell stiffly back to its side, but it was, without question, alive. "You felt the pulse, very strong, yes? Exceptionally fine muscle tone, also, a result of tensions and counter-tensions within. Dead, as you said, sir, and yet technically alive, and at present therapeutic appropriation levels likely to remain for 50, 60 years of the state, the costly custodial ward." The good doctor nodded in serious reflection. Man, he had made his point that time. Nothing but passes on the dice for him today. "Oh," Representative Hillier spoke up thoughtfully. 2 years like that, you say? Poor fellow. What happened to him? Some ghastly experience? A horrible personal tragedy? Another interesting point. According to our case history records, nothing. The mother died, yes, but nothing out of the way there, and this was some time before. Adjustment, apparently, had been difficult but successful, and then abruptly, in the situation of no visible stress, click, like turn of switch. The organism, the mental organism, has refused life and turned away, resolutely, face to blank wall. Frozen, the complete catatonic state. Hopeless, with present facilities, that is. Of course, with more modern equipment, more funds at the disposal, even the case such as this, who could say? Humph, Representative Crabtree. But he was impressed. As well be dead as like that. It is terrible thing, gentlemen, yes. Our responsibility to this fellow human being, it has been properly discharged. All that we may do, has it been done? Representative Hillier thought about it a moment. How much more money could cure him? Could anything cure him? No word seemed exactly safe. Dr. Halliwell shrugged, expressively non-committal. Well then, Doctor, here he is. We have done what we can within reason. Within reason, Doctor. But a line must be drawn. Arbitrarily, if you will, but it must be drawn. We cannot, can we, bleed endlessly for all suffering humanity? First, we must live ourselves, or life ceases. Second, we should be fair as we see it, kind within reason. We can be held responsible no further than that. Undoubtedly a very poor bet for re-election, Representative Hillier. Dr. Halliwell paused a moment only to collect mentally several ringing passages of rebuttal from some of his more effective speeches on service. Into the interval of silence a hoarse, rusty-sounding voice spoke. "By God," it said, in a tone of revelation, "I think that's right. In fact, that has got to be right. It's not my fault, not my responsibility, what happens to them. I've got to live." The committee members exchanged looks of suspicious surprise. Dr. Halliwell had no one to exchange with, and wore a look of total astonishment, chagrin, and annoyance. It might be all very well for this living corpse to move back into the world. There were plenty of patients, and if one chose to be cured, fine. But not like that, offhand, casually, in response to some stupid chance remark instead of to fine, expensive treatment. He waved a curtly commanding signal to an attendant as the patient, George Dibbit, incredibly lifted himself to shaky feet and looked about with every indication of intelligent interest. Gentlemen," said Dr. Halliwell, "I'm afraid already too much of your valuable time I have wasted in inspection of this so minor sector of our great institution. Shall we—" "No, wait just a suffering minute here, Halliwell," yapped Representative Crabtree. "I think the committee might like to ask this peculiar patient some questions." Well, gentlemen, as you wish, of course. It is only that with such a case, when we see the sudden turn from total inactivity, there may come the sudden total activity at any moment now." "He might get violent? Well, Doctor, like you say, maybe we've wasted enough time already hanging around here. Come on." The committee moved on. The burly, white-coated attendant was at George's side. "So," he said, a growl of pleased menace, "you finally decided to come out of it, did ya? And maybe you got it in mind to make some trouble for old Keegan, have ya?" "Oh, no," said George. "No, sir, indeed I hadn't thought of anything like that at all. Please, believe me, I wouldn't." All right, so shut thee up already before I decide to show you some slapping up exercises you never got yet. You can walk for yourself now. Good. Do it, Mac. Your suite is ready. Move out now. George moved on the word, but Keegan caught his arm just the same in a powerful, twisting grip. It was an effort not to cry out, but George made it. 2 years of rigid bodily inactivity didn't mean his whole mind had been still and dead. The essential self of George Dibbit, the I, had willed itself into immobility, but his senses had observed and other sections of his mind had recorded. The subconscious had noted, recognized, weighed, considered and filed data. Now that the ego had been triggered back into life, all this material was there, ready for use. He knew exactly where he was and how and why. He knew who this guard was too. Old Keegan was a happy man, in his way, and fortunate in his vocation of asylum guard. It dovetailed so nicely with his avocation, which was petty sadism. There was Keegan, and there was George Dibbit. They had followed converging lines of personal history to that moment, and at that moment the mind of George Dibbit flashed in review a substantial infinity of possible actions, leading to an infinite number of possible future lines and directions, many similar, some at wide variance. Which act and line should he, George Dibbit, select? He shrugged imperceptibly and moved on toward his cell. Keegan held to his left arm and twisted. There were so many things George might have done. Screamed, kicked, fought, cried, any number of variations. But what he did was move quietly and uncomplainingly along. Not a cry. Keegan twisted harder and was disappointed. George bit his lip. That man Hillier was right, he told himself. It isn't my responsibility to bleed for everyone. I must live and do what in reason is right for me. Keegan is his own lookout, and if he moves in a certain direction when he leaves me, well, it's his movement, not mine. And, a small afterthought of rationalization added, a man as mean as that ought to die anyway. That grip of his is murder. Down a short stretch of hall, George's arm was freed, and he was locked in his small square room with a small barred window in the door. After a while, some nurse or other would look in on him. In the meantime, he sat on the mattress on the floor, and reviewed an infinity of lines to varied futures, confining himself as rigidly as possible to his own possibilities. The others, not his responsibility. And the line now for him, certainly, was one which would lead him out of this place. An hour later, when Nurse Rosecrans came in, he firmly declined a little snack to be given intravenously. "Believe me," he insisted, "I can eat now." "Well, I don't know. Your chart still says." "Kind of a pity about what happened to Keegan, isn't it, Miss Rosecrans?" "Nothing bad that happened to Keegan would be a pity. What happened to him?" Keegan was going across the road to the campus to pick up some red ants to spread around women's security. Keegan was always trying, wasn't he? Even if he wasn't very imaginative. Wasn't? He's gone now. Stepped off the high curb out front there. His heel came down in some oil. Slipped. Bang. Down he went, head, smack on the curb. Cracked his thick skull. Not like an egg, I guess. More like a walnut. "Humph! And when do you suppose all this happened?" About a minute and a half ago. Man, you are a real Oops. Please, Miss Rosecrans, not any more. I'm not. Tell Dr. Halliwell I want to see him, will you? Ha! She left. In something under half an hour she was back. Where did you hear about Keegan? You couldn't possibly, you know. It happened right while I was standing here talking to you. But I was right, wasn't I? Did you tell Dr. Halliwell I want to see him? Of course not. You know he wouldn't. On the contrary, I know that if you go to Dr. Halliwell's office and mention that I wish to see him about Louisville in 1946, he will see me. Nonsense. And if you do that for me, Miss Rosecrans, and if you then go and take a nice, warm, relaxing bath with bath salts, dress in that new low-cut rose taffeta of yours, wear that perfume you never quite dared try, and, at 5:30, walk slowly down the hall towards the front entrance. Dr. Devers will happen along and insist on taking you out to dinner. Later, he will make you a very appealing proposition. But he never... But tonight he will, if you do as I say. And if you hold out on the proposition, he'll make a proposal of it. How could you possibly know all that? I knew about Keegan, didn't I? And Dr. Halliwell will see me. Take a chance, Miss Rosecrans. What have you got to lose? Of course, there were a number of other probability lines for her that could lead to a reasonably happy marriage to Benny Buzztow, owner of Buzz's Garage. But that was a jumble, too far ahead to see clearly, and if Dr. Devers did already have a wife in Spokane, the hell with that. What was right for George Dibbit was that he see Dr. Halliwell, the old quack, and get out of here. Nurse Rosecrans was her own responsibility. A tourniquet for Rosecrans. He, damn it, was finished bleeding for all wounds. At 4 p.m., George Dibbit was called in for a completely out-of-routine interview with Dr. Halliwell. He looked firmly straight ahead as Nurse Rosecrans, smiling girlishly over her prospective date, ushered him into the doctor's study. "Ah, George, old boy," said Dr. Halliwell, rising from his easy-chair by the fireplace. "And how are we this evening?" "Fine, Doctor. Quite well now, in fact, and ready to leave here tomorrow." Nurse Rosecrans closed the door behind her. "Feet first, Dibbit," inquired Dr. Halliwell in quite a different tone. "What in hell do you know about Louisville in 1946? "Actually nothing much, Doctor. Now." The doctor started to reach for the row of buzzer buttons on the desk at his right. "Except that it is clear to me, Doctor, that mention of the words Louisville, abortion racket, Mary Skinner, and forged credentials will serve to get me your full attention." The doctor, looking quite suddenly pale, sank back into his chair and gave George Dibbit his full attention. "You couldn't know," he whispered. "You couldn't possibly know about all that." "Of course I don't," said George cheerfully, "and assuming that things develop as I am sure they will, and you arrange for my full discharge from this crummy asylum tomorrow, it will not become necessary or even possible for me, or anyone else, ever to know much of anything about all that." "Dibbit," said Dr. Halliwell grimly, "you are a soft-shelled nut on a shaky tree, but you've got hold of something. What in hell is it?" "May I sit down, Doctor?" George sat in the straight arm-chair facing Dr. Halliwell. "Now I see I must explain to you. It is all right here in my mind, Doctor." The doctor looked again at the buttons on his desk. "Including the abortion racket bit in Louisville." The doctor looked back at George. "The thing is this," George went on, At any given moment for anyone, there is an infinity of different courses open. Right now, there are millions of alternative possibilities for me, things I could say or do. And, Doctor, I can see all of them and the consequences of each. What nonsense! And that, Doctor, is how I knew that all the words I might have voiced, the references to forged credentials, Louisville, Mary Skinner, and abortion, would be of particular significance to you and would persuade you to listen to me, as you are. That much was undeniable. What did this nut actually have? Might as well go along and try to find out, Dr. Halliwell decided. When did this, remarkable talent come to you, Dibbit? Just today? Oh, no, Doctor. That is what brought me here. Why, seems to me a thing like that could be rather, profitable. George smiled. And it can. My trouble was that, up until today, I didn't know how to apply it reasonably. When the thing first happened, 2 years ago, it threw me flat. Hasn't it ever bothered you, Doctor, the question of what if? What if you were to do this, or that? The doctor nodded. He was doing well enough. That what if question, barring a few unlucky miscalculations back there in Louisville, he generally managed to come up with pretty well-calculated answers. Even Louisville, at least he'd gotten out in time, with credentials. Well, Doctor, it was a question that nearly drove me mad. What if? What if I do this, I used to wonder, or what if I do that instead? But I could never know, never be sure. What result would any action of mine bring? If I only knew, it seemed to me, then I could decide what to do, act with a clear conscience. I wondered, worried myself sick. And then came that evening 2 years ago. What if, I wondered, and all at once I knew what each course I might take would bring. It drove me mad. Right, Doctor? At least it put me in the state I was in for the past 2 years, frozen. A distorted sense of responsibility, that was the thing. You, Doctor, would have known better. But when I suddenly saw the possibilities of pain, tragedy even, that the most inconsequential act of mine might bring to others, I couldn't stand it. I froze. Even freezing, of course, had its spread of consequences, but, at least, it seemed to reduce my responsibility to a minimum. And now you just don't give a damn? If I cut myself, Doctor, would you bleed? There has got to be a line, and I have drawn one. But you still don't quite believe me, do you, Doctor? Dr. Halliwell shrugged. Of course it wasn't believable, but... So now I see I'll have to give you a little demonstration. If I do thus and so in this situation, then you inevitably must. Well, we will see. Mind if I take a piece of paper and pencil from your desk? Of course you don't mind. All right. I'll jot down a few notes. Now, Doctor, if you will just do something, any simple series of little actions, anything that might come to your mind, things you know I couldn't possibly have guessed. George folded the sheet of paper he had written on and handed it to the doctor. What you're about to do is written down here. Dr. Halliwell took the piece of paper and tucked it in his pocket. He could always go along with a gag if it didn't cost anything. If this disproved a point, then he could get rid of this nut. What if it didn't? Dr. Halliwell was no worrier. There was always some out. The dignified doctor thought a second. Then he got up from his chair and sat on the floor. He took off his left shoe, wiggled long finger-like toes vigorously, scratched the bottom of the foot with his right hand, and, smiling thinly, slipped the shoe back on. Then he got back to his chair, scratched at his nose with his left hand, and finally pulled the piece of paper from his pocket. The paper read, "Sit on floor, take off shoe, left, wiggle toes, scratch foot, right hand, note, hole in heel of sock. Put shoe back on, back in chair, scratch nose, read paper, take shoe off again." Dr. Halliwell tried to stop himself, but couldn't. Irresistibly, he had to take the left shoe back off and look. There was a hole in the heel of the sock. For an instant he questioned his own sanity, but he hadn't bounced back up from whatever it might have been that he was back in Louisville, to his present position of modest eminence without being adaptable, quick-thinking, and quite sure of his own mind and rightness. If this Dibbit psycho actually did have some faculty of foreseeing and effectively directing his own future and, incidentally, that of others in contact with him, well, first, it would certainly be wise not to antagonize him. Second, if there really was anything in the proposition, there certainly ought to be something in it for Dr. Halliwell. "Ah, yes. Well now, Mr. Dibbit, you want me to secure release tomorrow? It would be stretching regulations a good bit to arrange such a thing." "I have a clear conviction that the elastic regulation is not a new thing to you, Doctor." "Ah, it could be managed, I suppose. Of course, before I agree to this, you must know that I am going to ask your assurance that you, entertain only the best of good wishes for me personally, that you guarantee not, through some simple act of yours, to arrange anything unpleasant." "You have my promise." He, George Dibbit, would neither bleed nor stab. "And now, to save time, Doctor, suppose I give you some of the answers I see you feel you must have without bothering to have you voice the questions." "That would be interesting." "Yes, seeing all of the possible lines into the future is very confusing. It was horribly jumbled and mixed up at first. Now I begin to find that I can pick a line, an aim for myself, and concentrate on that, and it is easier. All of the others are there. I know what they are, but I keep them in the background. I can only see these lines of consequence for a short period ahead now. Then it fogs up. But the extent is increasing with practice. 2 years ago it was only an hour. Now I can visualize a day or more. No, I'm not going to tell you anything about your future. I'm not looking at it. I don't care, one way or the other. Why should I? No, I am not going to tell anyone else about this faculty of mine. I'm just going to use it to get along reasonably myself. I won't try to hurt anyone. And that's the end of my responsibility, understand? And why, Doctor, are you going to insist that I promise to name you a major beneficiary in my will?" The doctor started. It was a thought, all right, now he thought about it. "Ah, well, Mr. Dibbit, I can't control the future or look into it. You know that. The best I can do is a simple little hunch." "You think I might choose to end my own life?" "An absurd thought, isn't it, Mr. Dibbit? But naturally, even with your gift, you can't live forever." George looked mildly disturbed. He hadn't thought much about that, although he would. "And of course you will become very, very rich. It will be a comfort to me, shall we say, to know that my heirs will be so well provided for." Humph. Such deep family devotion on the part of Dr. Halliwell, a bachelor, seemed unlikely. Well, since you're going to be so insistent, I don't suppose it really matters to me. All right, I agree. Dr. Halliwell, rising, smiled and said aloud, Fine. Tomorrow you re-enter the world to make it yours, Mr. Dibbit. It is a wonderful gift you have. You are much to be envied. And said to himself, But not by me. It is a wonderful gift, yes, but its ultimate practicality I question. So they said good night. The good Dr. Halliwell stayed for a bit in his study, doctoring papers, fixing up the retroactive records and such that would take care of George Dibbit's release the following day. George went back to his tiny world of 4 walls and a mattress for the last time. He didn't mind. He had, as they say, a few things to think through. The next morning George ate a hearty breakfast of, no, not the usual mush, fruit, waffles, 2 fresh eggs, sunny, and coffee, all from Dr. Halliwell's own kitchen, served by a radiant Nurse Rosecrans. George thanked her. Her gratitude was just a little embarrassing, but George looked the other way, an essential new skill, and ate with good appetite. Afterward, he waited. Naturally, he knew there were clearances to be cleared, that it would take a little time. Naturally, he knew that he would leave the hospital at exactly 11:55. Still, the waiting did make him just the tiniest bit nervous. He did develop the merest touch of heartburn. He left exactly on the minute, in Dr. Halliwell's big black car, to ride the 2 miles to the railroad station over at Kinville. He got out at the station. George Dibbit, free man of clear decision. George Dibbit, with a railroad ticket to the city and $5 in the side pocket of the same dark suit, a touch snug now, with a black armband he had, anxiously, decided to wear to work that morning over 2 years before. He was the least bit nervous, a touch impatient, but still he watched 2 trains through the station before he boarded the 5:10. Why? Because he figured the $200 would come in handy, of course. On the train, no trouble. He found his way directly to the club car. A lurch of the train. He stumbled. 2 sharp-eyed men eyed him sharply. He did look a type, almost too gullible, almost too perfect to be true. "Poker?" he answered blandly a minute or 2 later. "No, I've never played it, but I'd like to learn." He didn't have to learn. It was incredible, the blind, dumb luck of the jerk, and with the cards stacked, how could he possibly? But George made the city with $200 in pocket. The 2 sharp-eyed, red-faced men eyed each other sharply. They would quarrel viciously, but not George's responsibility. From the station, George went to the best hotel, the Grand. He moved into the best room. No, taking the honeymoon suite solo didn't bother him. He knew company would be coming. He ordered the best dinner, room service. He was tired. He had some thinking to do. "And, boy," he told the waiter, "bring me a pack of soda mints too, will you?" So he got soda mints after dinner, very soothing to the nervous stomach, and tipped the waiter a 5, and if the waiter bought a bottle with it, got drunk and— That was his lookout, not George Dibbit's. George ate, enjoyed a bottle of good wine with his soda mints, and slept passably well enough. His mind was very clear. He could see a wonderful 2 weeks ahead now, before the fog closed in. The next day, at exactly 10:30 a.m., just as the fluffy, dull-cute little blonde receptionist got back from her coffee break, he walked into the outer office of Berner and Barnes, attorneys. George smiled with a little wistful twist and asked to see either of the partners. The doll looked him over. He looked shabby. Cute, too, in a funny sort of way, that little smile of his, but she had her orders. "I'm sorry, Mr. Dibble, but Mr. Barnes is out of town, and Mr. Berner positively can't see anyone without an appointment." "Oh? Well, let's see. This is Thursday. Perhaps you could get me an appointment with him for day after tomorrow, up at Lake Winnebago, after you and he have gotten settled in, and— You. But he smiled at her with such warm, sympathetic understanding for a poor girl's problems that she couldn't really be mad at him, although how he could possibly have known— Well, let Mr. Berner worry about that. "If you will wait just a minute," she smiled, blushed charmingly, a rare talent. "I'll check with Mr. Berner, and I'll just practically sure he'll be able to squeeze you in." Mr. Berner was able to squeeze George in, but not out. "Dibbit," said Mr. Berner, as soon as George had managed to switch the subject from Lake Winnebago. "Dibbit? A Dibbit estate? Oh, yes, but Dr. Halliwell assured me personally— well, it was only some 15,000 or so, Mr. Dibbit. Your mother was never a wealthy woman, and I'm sure you will understand, unfortunate investments, even the most careful management cannot always—" "But it can sometimes, eh?" George interrupted. "Especially if it's careful enough, right? I have in mind, particularly, the City Rapid Transit and those old, supposedly defaulted West Side Horse Car Company bonds that were redeemed, and Mr. Barnes's nephew on the Utilities Commission. Careful management. Please, Mr. Dibbit. Please, Mr. Berner, don't give that elevator shaft another thought. Accidents are dreadfully poor management." "Yes, Mr. Dibbit. Now, back to that Dibbit estate. 15,000, did I say? Of course. And I am confident that a check of our records will show that the estate has not diminished. Very possibly some appreciation even. 1,000 to— "2," said George. "I wouldn't want to be unreasonable or hurt anyone." No, indeed, he wouldn't. Or do anything dishonest either. George Dibbit was a man with a very strong sense of responsibility. Within reason, that is. There was, of course, his investment in the old Hanheim Company brewery, and the business of that personal tax loss carryover that the district collector took such an interest in. "Damned if I'm quite sure yet whether that slippery young man found a new loophole or made one. But if he ever slips—" But how could George Dibbit slip? He knew all the answers. They came to him. And, of course, the court found for him all the way in all of the tax cases. The money rolled in and piled up. Before the first year was out, Berner and Barnes— Buck Berner was very understanding about George and Flo, the little blonde receptionist— dropped all their other business, even City Transit, to handle the unpublicized but burgeoning Dibbit empire. A fine business. As Buck Berner said, Georgie, my boy, that amazing business instinct of yours, and my legal talent, let me tell you—" "No, let me tell you." George was developing rapidly in confidence and irritability, that nervous stomach. "Just keep track of the money, and your mouth shut. Me? I know what I need to know, and that is enough, and I don't need you to tell me anything else. What I don't know—" "Won't hurt you, right?" Buck Burner laughed jovially and patted George's back with warm affection. George winced a touch and moved away. Of course, poor old Buck Burner died of a stroke in late March at Lake Winnebago, off-season, certainly no fault of George's, but Henry Barnes's nephew came into the firm and carried on well enough. A tiresome thing, money, after a certain point, George Dibbit thought. He thought about a lot of things, and farther ahead. The money, after the first few months, took very little of his attention. He made the necessary decisions. The money piled up, and he was generous with it. What more could anyone reasonably ask of him? Well, yes, girls. Some of them thought of something further to ask, such as, for instance, about marriage. And George thought about it too. He thought about it a lot, and over a long period of time. Well, George Dibbit was no wolf at heart. Of course, on the outside, with all that money, plus that peculiar appeal he seemed to have, the timely word, the touching gesture, something. Sure, he had girls, and some of them wanted to marry him, George Dibbit, not just the money. So what if he married one? What if? If he didn't tell her what he knew, she would know he was holding something back, and before long she would hate him. If he did tell her, she would hate him before he managed to get his mouth shut after explaining it. He would be responsible for— No, not that. So young George Dibbit was a young financial wizard and an international playboy. Not a bad life. Irresponsible? A matter of opinion. No, in George's. Hell, he never played rough. A year, 2.5. Mr. Dibbit, just back from abroad, was spending an early evening in his full-floor suite in the Grand. It was his regular, nightly quiet hour. He wore a dressing gown and sat in an easy-chair, a tray, a drink, a couple of packs of soda mints beside him. He sipped and popped a mint in his mouth, and another. A door opened. "George?" called the girl, a tall, smooth-curved redhead. "Georgie Pye?" A very sweet-talking girl for a redhead. "When are we—" "Shut up," said George dully. "I've told you and told you. Don't yell at me when I'm trying to think. What do I have to— Well, look, hon. Why don't you just go downstairs and wait for me in the lobby?" "But—" "That young assistant manager with the cute moustache is just going off duty. If I'm not there in 20 minutes, don't wait for me." She went without protest. George took another mint. He hadn't aged much, apparently. He didn't look a bit old, just sick. His face was grey. There were beads of sweat on his forehead. His hands trembled and he gritted his teeth, every nerve drawn tense. What if? But no, damn it, no use. He could look and he could look, but he had seen it all now, all there was. He was 34 years old. The maximum, Now he knew, since that last long, stubbornly misted-over stretch of future possibility had cleared tonight, was another 89 years. Long enough? No, of course it wasn't. Not when he knew. And besides, such a miserable death. The last 15 years as a drooling, senile idiot. The thought was intolerable. No, not that. But what then? Take that 70-year option and the assassin's bullet in the back? How could he stand waiting for that? If he could only put it out of his mind. But no, not the frontal lobotomy. No more nerves, no more worry, but the price. A mindless drift to Skid Row. The cirrhosis, agonizing. He could almost feel it. No. But that was the way it went. There were millions of roads, an infinity of alternate possible roads stretching before him, and each one ended in death. How could he live with that knowledge? How could he go on, waiting, knowing all the time the exact hour, day, minute, and the manner of his death? No. 89 years. 70 years. Any years. No, he couldn't. He wouldn't stand months of suspense. He wouldn't, by God, stand another— Wait. The thought of Dr. Halliwell, smiling, smoothly confident, back there at the state hospital, crossed his mind. Should he look? No, he couldn't see anything there. It didn't connect closely enough with his own paths any more. But, George smiled, at least he could write the doctor a letter. He could wait long enough to do that. He did. The death of George Dibbit, young man with everything in the world to live for, all that money, and from an overdose of sleeping pills at that, was a news wonder. Why? The newspapers wondered in headlines. Everybody wondered. Why? Everybody wondered, that is, except Dr. Halliwell, the controversial, investigation-plagued director of the state hospital. Dr. Halliwell, when he heard the news on the radio in his office, smiled and nodded to himself. I thought so, and none too soon either, since that blasted nurse Rosekrantz had to go and shoot her husband, Dr. Devers, and then start talking. Well, the Dibbit money would take care of things. But then, the Dibbit letter came first, special delivery, that same evening. It was George Dibbit's last word. Dr. Halliwell, in his study, slit open the envelope after a good deal of careful thought. He had considered burning it, but he was always a curious man. Dear Dr. Halliwell, it said, you win. You didn't think I could take it once I knew clear to the end, right? And right, I can't. Can't take the money either, can I? So it goes to you. Everything you have always wanted. You are rich, Dr. Halliwell, and I, George Dibbit, am dead. Your future is clear, isn't it? Or is it? Dr. Halliwell snorted and read on. You know that I must know the answer, don't you? And when you get my money, that is my doing, isn't it? How much you get, how you get it, and what happens after you get it. In other words, Doctor, it looks as though your death will be on my time, doesn't it? It will be my doing and my responsibility. All right? I don't mind. You bet that my temperament wouldn't be able to stand the strain of waiting out a certainty. I wonder if you, Doctor, even for all that money, can stand waiting out the uncertainty, never knowing just when and how I may have decided to kill you. What do you say to that, Dr. Halliwell? The letter ended. Nonsense, said the doctor to it firmly. Arrant nonsense. But an hour later, very quietly, Dr. Halliwell left his comfortable quarters at the state hospital. He carried a suitcase. He was travelling light, fast, and far. The money, all that George Dibbit left. There is a Church of the Advent of Everlasting Night, a peculiar sect, one that is making book on the end of the world on March 18, 1968. Since Dr. Halliwell disappeared and never did file claim, by the Dibbit will the whole fortune went to the Nighters, as they are called, where, as George's will remarked, it will do the most good. And what did he mean by that? Who knows? Who wants to? The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. If you like this sort of human read narration, please consider becoming a member of the channel. Members not only get rid of some of their unwanted money, but also may access the stories a whole week before everyone else. And that's it, really. Oh yes, the stories are and will remain AI free. And free of charge, of course.